So now we're going to be looking at how to find the equation of the line in y equals mx plus b form. And what you should know from your algebra days is that m stands for the slope and b stands for the y-intercept. So what's going to happen in these kinds of problems is you're going to be given various sorts of information, and basically the task is this: you need to find the slope and you need to find the y-intercept. So here's your first scenario here. You know the slope is 2. But you don't know the y-intercept, but what you do know is that it passes through the point 3, 14. So already we know the slope is 2, so that means m is 2. So in our equation up here we can write y equals 2x plus b. Now we don't know the y-intercept, but what we do know is this point here. And this point tells us what x is and what y is. So basically what we can do now is we can go into this equation where we don't know y, we don't know x, and we don't know b, and b is what we're going to be solving for. But what we can do now is substitute in 14 for y, so this becomes a 14. The x is no longer x, it's 3, and then finally b is still b, and that's what we're going to end up solving for here. So if we solve this here, 2 times 3 is 6, so in this equation here 14 equals 6 plus b, and if we subtract 6 on both sides we get 8 equals b. So therefore our final equation would be y equals 2x plus 8. So that would be our equation in y equals mx plus b form. So that's a pretty straightforward one where you're actually given the slope and a point. So what happens now if you're not given the slope? What if you have to actually figure out the slope? So here's another scenario here where you're given 2 points. Alright? This is x, this is y, and this is also x, and this is y. And what we do a lot of times, we refer to this as x1 and y1 because they're the first points. We put 1s there. And this is the second point, so that would be a 2 and a 2. So x2 and y2. So we need to find the slope first. And the slope, as you can recall from your algebra days, would be defined as the change in y over the change in x. It's vertical change over horizontal change. And there's a formula for that that you would remember, hopefully here. It's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That's how you can find the vertical change, and that's how you find the horizontal change. So in this case here, you'd say, well, what is y2? Well, y2 is 1 minus, and what is y1? Well, it's negative 3. Also, x2 would be 18, and x1, excuse me, there would be 6. So 1 minus a negative 3 would be a positive 4. And 18 minus 6 is 12, and that means 1/3 is our slope. So that means over here, I'm going to write this down. I'm going to write down my equation so far is y equals 1/3 x plus b, and that comes from the slope is 1/3. And just like we did up here, all what we have to do is plug in a point. So the question is, which point would you rather plug in? This one, the first one, or the second one? Now I kind of like the second one only because they're both positive here. So I know my y is 1, so I'm going to replace this with a 1. I know my x is no longer x, my x is now 18, and then plus b. So 1/3 of 18 is 6, so I get 1 equals 6 plus b, and if I go ahead and subtract 6 on both sides, I get b equals negative 5. So what is the final equation here? My final equation would be y equals 1/3 x minus 5. And it should make this true. Both points should be able to fit in here to make it true. So for instance, if we plugged in a 6 over here, so we'd say, well, what is 1/3 of 6? Well, 1/3 of 6 is 2, and 2 minus 5 is negative 3. So it should check for the other point as well. Alright, so we got a couple other scenarios here that can happen. Another way of finding the equation here is, what if you're not told 2 points, but you're told that it's parallel to a line? And what do we know about parallel lines? Parallel lines, remember, are lines like this that never cross. So what do we know about their slopes? We know their slopes are the same. So I'm going to write same slope here. So the question is, if we were to look at this equation here, 3x plus y equals 7, well, what's the slope? Well, you don't know yet because you haven't solved for y. So I'm going to write that equation here, 3x plus y equals 7. So how would we solve for y? Well, we'd subtract 3x on both sides. So I'm going to write negative 3x minus 3x over here. So y equals negative 3x plus 7. So what's the slope here? Well, the slope is negative 3. So if I know it's parallel to it, it must have the same slope. So my equation is also going to be negative 3x but I don't know what the y-intercept. Here it's 7. Here I'm not sure what it is yet, but I do know once again it passes through this point. That's x, that's y, so once again I'm going to plug in y is 11, x is -3, so it's going to be -3, x is now -3 as well, plus b. Well, -3 times -3 is 9. And if I subtract 9 on both sides, I get 2 equals b. So the equation is y equals -3x plus 2. All right, and finally, the fourth type of equation you might be given here, or something you have to figure out, is when it's perpendicular. So what does perpendicular mean? Well, perpendicular doesn't mean same slope. It's lines like this. You got one line, you got a second line, they cross, and they form 90-degree angles here. So when it's perpendicular, they obviously don't have the same slope, but what they do have is they have what's called opposite reciprocals. Okay, opposite reciprocal. Opposite meaning different sign, and you'll notice here it's kind of obvious. One of them has a positive slope, one has a negative slope here, so that's where the opposite comes from. Reciprocal means as a fraction, flipping it. So let's find the slope here. So to find the slope, we're going to go ahead and divide by -2, divide by -2, divide by -2. And so when we do that, we get y equals -3/2 x minus 6. So if we want to find the slope for this, we need to first of all change the sign. So it was negative, now it's going to be positive. So our slope is not going to be negative, it's going to be positive, and then we flip this, so it's going to be 2/3. So therefore, our equation is going to be 2/3 x plus b. And once again, this shouldn't be a shocker to you, but we do know x and y. X and y are up here. So y is 6. X is no longer x, it's 15. What is 2/3 of 15? Well, 2/3 times 15 is 10. And if you subtract 10 on both sides, subtract 10, you get -4 equals b. So what is our final equation here? It is y equals 2/3 x minus 4. So there you have it. That's the 4 different scenarios here for how to take the information you're given and put it into the line equation of a line y equals mx plus b form.